You ever seen a video that talks about making your paintbrushes look like this, but in reality, they're like this? To make sure that our paintbrushes don't do this and do this, we need to maintain them. So I'm here to talk about keeping your stuff in good shape. There is a lot of money to be spent in paintbrushes, especially if you're going for the Kolinsky sable brushes, costing you $15 a pop practically. And if you get a few of them, whew, you're getting set back. We want to try and keep our brushes in as best a shape as possible, because the longer we keep them in good shape, sure, the more we can use them, the sharper the point of it is, the more precise we can be. Well, then we also don't have to spend more money just to buy the same product again, so we can have something that's functional. And the question is, of course, how do we do that? Well, let's start with the preemptive stuff, and then we'll work our way to the actual cleaning of the thing. All our brushes have a tip, a belly, and then where the bristles meet the actual sort of handle, where this is held by the ferrule. And the one thing that we want to avoid generally is acrylic paint getting up to the ferrule. Partly, acrylic paint is quite harsh on our brushes. And partly because acrylic paints, they harden. And what they'll do is they'll harden in the bristles, causing the bristles themselves to deform, meaning that the brush will lose its point or it will change shape, and then we can no longer properly use it. So we want to avoid having acrylic paint jammed up into the ferrule. So how can we avoid doing that? Well, one way is whenever we're picking up paint or mixing paint with our paintbrush, we never really do it anywhere past the halfway point. We generally always want to stay much closer to the tip of the brush. The further we bring it upwards into the body of the brush or into the belly of the brush, the more likely that the acrylic pigment paint medium will get closer to the ferrules, which means it's more likely to cause a problem because it's harder to clean closer to the ferrule. Okay. Conceptually, that absolutely, you can think about it and you're like, oh yeah, that absolutely works. I'm gonna just say something here for practicality's sake. The belly is the position that holds the most amount of liquid. And that's why a lot of painters love a big belly in their paintbrush. And because of that, when we're picking up the pigment and paint, it's gonna get in here anyway. So you can be absolutely super careful and say, oh, only ever gets to the tip, but that's really an unlikely circumstance that you're gonna be able to do. We want it to hold because it means that it doesn't dry so quickly. There are a lot of reasons, but that's a big one. So a thing we could also do, because these brushes, the Kolinsky brushes, are more expensive, then when we're mixing our paint on the actual wet palette, it may be a wise idea to take a not very good brush or a brush that's been heavily used and you don't care about. Maybe it's one of your synthetic brushes that have no longer got a point anymore, like so, and use this as your brush to mix things. And so then you've got a brush that you don't really care about. You don't have to be considerate with every single time that you're going back, oh yeah, I'm gonna mix this color and mix that color, and you just don't really care. And that's actually very nice. Now, for practical senses as well with this, I don't like doing that because I rarely like picking up, oh, I've got a brush in my hand, I'm using it to paint things. I don't want to have to put this brush down, pick this brush back up, mix it back around again, pick up the other brush, and then do it again. That just seems like this needless sense of hand motion, and it stops me from painting because I'm like picking up brushes. If you can do that, it's a great way of keeping your brushes in good nick, but I tend to find that I never do that just practically because I'm just like, oh, I'm painting, grab a bit of paint, do a little bit of a mix here, and then again, go back to it. So I'm never ever dropping my brush. But everyone sort of finds their own path when it comes to that, but just keeping the concepts in mind is helpful to making sure that we can have longevity in our brushes. If you don't switch brushes, like myself, then all you have to do is just be a bit more conscious, a bit more careful with this brush, and while you're blending and mixing things. You don't want to be stabbing your paint because you can damage the tip of the brush. So you generally want to come at the sort of more of a side angle or horizontally and mix them and blend them that way around. So you're doing the least amount of like pressing in with the bristles themselves. That will at least help it. So just something to be aware of. Well, we need to clean our brushes. So I have a good friend who is a phenomenal oil painter. Not that I've taken a whole lot of tips from her, but one thing she told me was you need to clean your brush every single time after you finish painting. There was no ifs, ands, or buts to that. There was this definitive sentence being said to me saying, clean your brush every single time that you use it. And I have followed that rule ever since I've learned it. I don't paint, let it go, leave my brush aside, come back in several hours and pick up that brush again. Effectively, as soon as I have finished painting and I'm thinking, hey, I am done, the first thing I do, besides closing the lid on my wet palette, is I will take my brush and I will go and rinse it out. And this singular tip, this singular action that you are doing here is perhaps one of the most important things you can do in terms of keeping your brushes in the best possible shape for as long as possible. Firstly, not all brushes are made equally. So you can get a bunk brush and it's not always necessarily down to cleaning it that your brush is going to stay in good shape. And that's a fact, and that sucks. And I wish there was some way that I could say, hey, all you have to do is clean it and make it better. That's not always true. I don't know why people say who claim that cleaning it is, oh, that'll turn any brush back to normal again. It just does not. It's just not the way it works. There are plenty of brushes that are absolutely useful from the start, and there are brushes that after you've used them a long time that you can never really bring back. No amount of cleaning is gonna get them functional. Partly because the bristles that we are using get used, they get worn, and eventually they give, and they no longer hold the shape. So our objectives as painters is to increase the longevity of our paintbrushes for as long as possible. So this is how we do it. Once you're finished with your painting session, you immediately take your paintbrushes that you're in use, and then you go to the sink. I'll literally open the tap to the slightest amount of water. It's a little dribble that's coming out. I don't want to waste excess water, and B, I just need a little bit of it at any one time because A, it's a small brush. And so we'll take it, and then this is where we'll need some soap. So there are plenty of companies out there that make brush soap. I think any one of them will do. However, Masters soap, or the Masters soap, has absolutely done the trick. So this jar here, which is 2.5 ounces, so it's not that big, this one here, I have been using for probably 2-something years. And I have just about completely finished using it up. So something like this, which is about $10, really will last you a very long time in painting. And if you're painting as consistently as I generally am, then this is gonna last you a couple years, which is great. What we'll do is we'll have a bit of water, we'll rinse our brush off, just quickly, and then we'll take the brush soap, fresh stuff here. We wanna get our soap to a lather. So generally, I'll take a bit of the water and I'll rub my finger in. A, to help soften the soap, and B, to sort of create a bit of a lather. Once I have done this, I will then take my brush and then I will gently, not very vigorously, gently, take it and twist in the lather that I've created. And as I've done this, it will pick up, the lather will get into the bristles and it will sort of clump around the paint that exists in there. And that's great, that's what you're looking to do. Once you've gotten a lot of lather built into it, I will then take my thumb and my forefinger and I will gently pull it out, generally with a little bit of a twist, not too aggressively. That's kind of the deal here, just not very aggressive in any of these things, pulling out the paint. And then I'll rinse it. And what I'll do then is I'll rinse and repeat. I'll go back to the thing, pull it, get more lather built back into it, try and catch more of that paint. Sometimes I'll press the ferrule a little bit into it just to make it so that there's the soap is initially catching right at the ferrule tip, and then I will pull it back out again gently and then rinse and repeat until there is no more paint that I can see. And so generally you have to do 3-4 passes at that. Once you've completed that and you found that there's no more paint going on anymore and you've got the last bit of just water left, you take it and you will pull for the last time into the lather, and then you will gently remove the excess amount of soap, leaving the soap in, and then using your hand or the back of your hand, any part of it, give it a twirl to get it back into a nice fine point. And once it sits at this nice fine point, what will happen now is that the soap will harden and the bristles will now maintain this shape. And that's perfect because now we're kind of giving memory to the actual bristles and saying, hey, stay in this shape. And so until next time, it will exactly be this shape. And that's just what we want. And then when we come back to it, the following time that we're painting, put a bit of water in it, it will completely release, and then you're back to painting again. And also, because you've left a little bit of the lather in there, it will also condition the bristles, meaning that you're giving more life to them. And that's really it. That's, at the end of the day, is the thing that you need to be doing every single time after you've finished painting. This tip, this act of cleaning your brushes, is important for all brushes that you have, no matter whatever kind of paint that you're really using. It's our tool, the paintbrush. Paint is another tool that we're utilizing. They get mixed together, and we want to keep the tools functional for as long as possible. So if you're using any kind of paint, I know mainly our hobby is acrylic and maybe a bit of oil or some enamel and things like that. We need to be conscious, and we just need to clean our brushes every single time that we use them. But what if I've got brushes that are in bad shape right now? Is there anything that I can do to fix them, to bring them back to life? Well, are you a doctor? Sometimes you can. Sometimes you can make the effort and bring brushes back to life. I'm going to start with saying that I have done this successfully, but not every single time that I've done it has it been successful. So I think it's just a matter of what's happened to the brush itself. And that's not always obvious. Maybe there's paint so deep in the ferrule that you cannot get to it. And because you cannot get to it, there's no means of truly removing it. But there are some things you can try and work with. One tool that I use, which is, again, many companies will make some equivalent of it. So this is a brush cleaner restorer, and it's specifically designed for dried acrylic or oil paints. And that's great because I have some oils and I mainly use acrylic. So I have a tiny little jar of this, which strangely has an X on it just telling me not to drink it, or anyone else, but I generally fill it up with a bit of this stuff in here. And what I'll do is I will take my brush, I'll sort of open this up, and I will just drop it in there. I will kind of run the brush along the edge of it, hopefully allowing it to, you know, make sure it captures all of the moisture that it needs. And then I will let it sit for a while. So what you should do with all of this stuff is follow the instructions of your brush cleaner stuff. With that, I then rinse it with water, and then I will continue to go back with brush cleaner. The brush restorer stuff helps to dissolve or break down the hard acrylic. And that can obviously be very important when you've got that sort of, when you've got the acrylic that's built up near the ferrule. And so that's what we're trying to do. And I have found that sometimes I can bring a brush back to working order, but a lot of the time I found that it just never quite does it. For me, when I paint, for the most part, I really want a fine tip. And I mean, I want a fine tip. It needs to be pretty bloody sharp. And I will work with a brush that has lost its point, but I prefer it when it's got a very fine point. And so when a brush loses that particular bit, then I'm a bit like, okay, I will use that brush for my base layerings and various other stuff. But for any fine detail work, I then stop using it. Okay, you're like, well, that's all good and dandy, Khan. That's Kolinsky brushes. I understand. I need to be more careful with them. Great, but what if I'm a synthetic brush user? Well, I'm okay. So what happens when you utilize a synthetic brush is something like this will tend to happen on your brush, but it's just slightly hooked at the end. So the tip has sort of lost its point, but it's not just lost its point, it's almost changed its angle a bit. And it's the dreaded hooked tip. If this happens to your brushes, instead of throwing them out or using them as just like your don't throw away brushes or you don't care brushes, you can actually repair these some of the time, depending on how bad the tip is gone. What you need to do is you need to utilize some very hot water. So perhaps you've boiled some water and let it cool down a little bit. You dip the brush into the hot water, let it sit for a little while, not too long. You can do it by hand, take it, and then again, like you would do with like the Kolinsky, perhaps on a surface because it's probably quite hot, try and get it back into a regular, back into a sort of sharp pointed tip, and then let it be for a little while and see if it retains its shape. Because it's synthetic, we can be much more harsh with the brushes. So that's just a nice little tip to try and keep the tip of your brush in good shape. And that only works for synthetic brushes. I have made some of my brushes last, half a year. just a single brush, keeping it working, you know. And some brushes which I've just bought and that have worked a few times have failed in a few weeks. And it's not that my brush practices have changed a whole lot. So I know just because the way that I use a brush, there may be problems with the brush itself. Hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully it just gives you the knowledge that you will need just to maintain, keep control, and have everything go relatively smoothly, and so you can focus more on painting.